Hello and welcome. So today we're going to be, I have this bug. Today we're going to be continuing on with the first and probably the second sutra. And I just want to make a disclaimer kind of admission. I am in no way, shape, or form fluent in Sanskrit. I can't read Devanagari script. I usually sound out the sutras, so you're going to see me doing that and making mistakes and trying to do it again and trying to get it right. Whether or not I'm getting it right, I don't know. Maybe someone could help with that. But this is how I do it. So I tend to take 3, 4, or 5 letter chunks and try to string them along. So hopefully I'll get it right and you won't be too hard on me. Anyone who's tried to read sutras or sound them out like this or chant them knows that it takes a little bit of practice, okay? So let's start with the first sutra in the first section, the Samadhi Pada. Atha yoga-anuśāsanam. Atha yoga-anuśāsanam. Now, herewith, of yoga, expounding, exposition, teaching. And he has interpreted that as meaning now an exposition of yoga is to be made. Okay, so this is basically just introducing you to the Yoga Sutras and letting you know what we're going to be talking about. So let's read. Generally, a treatise of this nature in Sanskrit begins with a sutra which gives an idea with regard to the nature of the undertaking. The present treatise is an exposition of yoga. The author does not claim to be the discoverer of this science, but merely an expounder who has tried to condense in a few sutras all the essential knowledge concerning the science which a student or aspirant ought to possess. Very little is known about Patanjali, although we have no information about him which can be called definitely historical. Still, according to a cult tradition, he was the same person who was known as Govinda Yogi and who initiated Shankaracharya in the science of yoga. So it's pretty significant. From the masterly manner in which he has expounded the subject of yoga in the Yoga Sutras, it is obvious that he was a yogi of a very high order, who had personal knowledge of all aspects of yoga, including its practical technique. As the method of expounding a subject in the form of sutras is particular and generally unfamiliar to Western students having no knowledge of the Sanskrit language, it would perhaps not be out of place to say here a few words on this classical method, which was adopted by the ancient sages and scholars in their exposition of some of the most important subjects. The word sutram in Sanskrit means a thread, and this primary meaning has given rise to the secondary meaning of sutra, which is as an aphorism, our aphorism. Just as a thread binds together a number of beads in a rosary, in the same way the underlying continuity of idea binds together in outline the essential aspects of a subject. The most important characteristics of this method are utmost condensation, consistent with clear exposition of all essential aspects and continuity of the underlying theme, in spite of the apparent discontinuity of the ideas presented. The latter characteristic is worth noting because the effort to discover the hidden thread of reasoning beneath the apparently unconnected ideas very often provides the clue to the meaning of many of the sutras. It should be remembered that this method of exposition was prevalent at a time when printing was unknown, and most of the important treatises had to be memorized by the student. Hence the necessity of condensation to the utmost limit. Nothing essential was, of course, left out, but everything with which the student was expected to be familiar, or which he could easily infer from the context, was ruthlessly cut out. The student will find on careful study that a tremendous amount of theoretical and practical knowledge the author has managed to incorporate in this very small treatise. Everything necessary for the proper understanding of the subject has been given at one place or another in a skeletal form, but the body of the requisite knowledge has to be dug out, prepared properly, chewed and digested before the subject can be understood thoroughly in its entirety. The sutra method of exposition may appear to the modern student needlessly obscure and difficult, but if he goes through the labor required for the mastery of the subject, he will realize its superiority to the all too easy modern methods of presentation. The necessity of struggling with the words and ideas and digging out their hidden meanings ensures a very thorough assimilation of knowledge and develops simultaneously the powers and faculties of the mind, especially that important and indispensable capacity of digging out of one's own mind, the knowledge which lies buried in its deeper recesses. So this is interesting. So he's referring to this kind of mental yoga, this unwinding, this kind of tying and binding up and unwinding process that we go through when we're contemplating these notions that the sutras are referring to, which is mental yoga. I'm a big proponent of this mental unwinding. But while this method of exposition is very effective, it has its drawbacks also. The chief disadvantage is the difficulty with which the ordinary student who is not thoroughly conversant with the subject has in finding the correct meaning. Not only is he likely to find many sutras difficult to understand on account of their brevity, but he may completely misunderstand some of them and be led astray in a hopeless manner. We have to remember that in a treatise like the Yoga Sutras, behind many a word, there is a whole pattern of thought of which the word is merely a symbol. To understand the true significance of the sutras, we must be thoroughly familiar with these patterns. The difficulty is increased still further when the words have to be translated into another language, which does not contain exactly the equivalent words. And this is what he talked about in the preface, that the language barrier is quite significant. Those who wrote these treatises were masterminds, masters of the subject and language they dealt with. There could be no fault in their method of presentation, but in the course of time, fundamental changes can sometimes be brought about in the meaning of words and the thought patterns of those who study these treatises. That's right, the cultural context changes, right? And this fact introduces endless possibilities of misunderstanding and misinterpretation of some of the sutras. In treatises of a purely philosophical or religious nature, such a misunderstanding would perhaps not matter so much, but in one of a highly technical and practical nature, like the Yoga Sutras, it can lead to great complications and even to dangers of a serious nature. Luckily for the earnest student, yoga has always been a living science in the East, and it has had an unbroken succession of living experts who continually verify by their own experiments and experiences the basic truths of this science. This has helped not only in keeping the tradition of yogic culture alive and pure, but to maintain the meanings of the technical words used in this science in a fairly exact and clearly defined form. And I found this to be true when studying the scriptures and trying to discover their meaning, and also in the practice of yoga itself, meditation yoga, selfless service yoga, karma yoga, physical yoga, hatha yoga, that a lot of experimentation is needed to discover what is true for yourself, right, in what is being taught to you and what you're practicing. It is only when a science is divorced completely from its practical application that it tends to lose itself in a morass of words which have lost their meaning in relation with the actual fact. While the method of presenting a subject in the form of sutras is eminently suited for the practical and advanced student, it can hardly be denied that it does not quite fit in with our modern conditions. In the olden days, those who studied these sutras had easy access to the teachers of the science, who elaborated the knowledge embodied in a condensed form, filling up the gaps and giving practical guidance. And these students had leisure in which to think, meditate, and dig out the meanings for themselves. The modern student who is interested merely in the theoretical study of the yogic philosophy and is not practicing it under an expert teacher has none of these facilities and needs an elaborate and clear exposition for an adequate understanding of the subject. He needs a commentary which not only aims at explaining the obvious meaning, but also the hidden significance of the words and phrases used in terms of the concepts with which he is familiar and can easily understand. He wants his food not in tabloid form, but in bulk, and if possible, in a palatable form. Okay, so he's just basically saying he has written all these expositions as a way of trying to interpret the sutras for you. And I find it kind of interesting. So have there been actually modern expositions on the Yoga Sutras that are written in more modern language? I actually really like this kind of old world way of writing and describing things, which is why this book just really appealed to me, and I'm hoping it appeals to you as well. So let's move on to the second sutra, which is, I'm sure you've heard this before, I know I've used it in some of my videos, Yogaś, citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ. And I tend to say the R's, roll the R's, so that's probably actually not correct. Yogaś, citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ. Yogaś, citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ. The essential technique of yoga, of mind, of modifications, inhibition, suppression, stoppage, restraint. Yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. Yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. Yogaś, citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ. This is one of the most important and well-known sutras of this treatise, not because it deals with some important principle or a technique of practical value, but because it defines with the help of only 4 words the essential nature of yoga. There are certain concepts in every science which are of a basic nature and which must be understood aright if the student is to get a satisfactory grasp of the subject as a whole. The ideas underlying all the 4 words in this sutra are of such a fundamental nature, and the student should try to grasp through study and reflection their real meaning. Of course, the significance of these words will become significantly clear only when the book has been thoroughly studied, and the various aspects of the subject considered in their relation to one another. It might be expected that words of such fundamental importance will be clearly defined and such definitions inserted wherever they are needed. But in the case of the present sutra, no such definitions have been given, and we can therefore conclude that the author expected the student to acquire a clear idea with regard to the import of the words from his study of the whole book. So they're basically saying, you won't understand fully this first sutra, or I guess it's the second one, until you've studied the whole book. But it is necessary for the student not to start his study with wrong or confused ideas. It will perhaps be worthwhile considering at this initial stage the import of the words in the sutra in a general way. So let's talk about that. Let us begin with the word yoga. The word yoga in Sanskrit has a very large number of meanings. It is derived from the root yug, Y-U-J, which means to join, and the idea of joining runs through all the meanings. What are the 2 things which are sought to be joined by the practice of yoga? According to the highest conceptions of Hindu philosophy, of which the science of yoga is an integral part, the human soul, or the jivatma, is a facet or partial expression of the oversoul, or paramatma, the divine reality, which is the source or substratum of the manifest universe. Although in essence the 2 are the same and are indivisible, still the jivatma has become subjectively separated from paramatma and is destined, after going through an evolutionary cycle in the manifest universe, to become united with him again in consciousness. This state of unification of the 2 in consciousness, as well as the mental process and discipline through which this union is attained, are both called yoga. This conception is formulated in a different way in the Samkhya philosophy, but on close analysis, the fundamental idea will be found to be essentially the same. Then we come to the word citta. The word is derived from the citta, chit or chitti, and it's referring to another sutra. One of the three aspects of Paramatma called Sat-Chittananda in Vedanta. I'm sure you've heard, if you practice yoga, I'm sure you've heard Sat-Chittananda. It is this aspect which is at the basis of the form side of universe and through which it is created. The reflection of this aspect in the universal, in the individual soul, which is a microcosm, is called citta. Citta is thus that instrument or medium through which the Jivatma materializes his individual world, lives and evolves in the world until he has become perfected and united with the Paramatma. Broadly, therefore, citta corresponds to mind of modern psychology, but it has a more comprehensive import and field for functioning. While citta may be considered as a universal medium through which consciousness functions on all the planes of the manifest universe, the mind of modern psychology is confined to the expression of only thought, volition, and feeling. We should not, however, make the mistake of imagining citta as a sort of material medium, which is molded into different forms when mental images of different kinds are produced. It is fundamentally of the nature of consciousness, which is immaterial but affected by matter. In fact, it may be called a product of both consciousness and matter, or Purusha and Prakriti, the presence of the both being necessary for its functioning. So Purusha and Prakriti is the individual soul and the manifest world in which that individual soul engages, right? So it's your individual and your life, basically. Okay. It is like an intangible screen which enables the light of consciousness to be projected in the manifest world. But the real secret of its essential nature lies buried in the origin of the manifested universe and can be known only on attaining enlightenment. It is true that the theory of perception, which is developed in section 4, which we have to go through the whole book to get to, can't jump around because otherwise you won't understand it when you get there. Which is developed in section 4, gives some general indication with regard to the nature of citti, but it does not say what citti essentially is. The third word we have to consider in this sutra is vritti, V-R-T-T-I. It is derived from the root vrt, V-R-T, which means to exist. So vritti is a way of existing. In considering the ways in which a thing exists, we may consider its modifications, states, activities, or its functions. All these connotations are present in the meaning of vritti, but in the present context, this word is best translated by the words modifications or functionings. Sometimes the word is translated as transformations. This does not seem to be justified in this particular sutra, because in transformation, the emphasis is on the change and not on the condition. The transformations of citti may be stopped, and it may still remain in one particular modification, as happens in sabija samadhi. So that's samadhi with the seed. As the ultimate aim of yoga in inhibition of all modifications in nirbija samadhi, or samadhi without the seed, which is higher than samadhi with the seed, it will be seen that the word transformation will not adequately express the meaning of the word vritti. Besides, the word transformation has to be used for the three parinamas, I don't know what that word is, dealt with in the first section or the first part of section 3. So he's constantly referring to these later sections that we haven't gotten to. So we have no idea what he's talking about for the most part, right? I mean, unless you've already read the book, and then you can go back and be like, oh, okay, I understand. This is why a lot of these scriptures it's a good idea to read them twice, right? You get through the whole thing, and then you go back and start again, and you're like, oh, I get it now, right? Since citta has a functional existence and comes into being only when consciousness is affected by matter, the word functionings perhaps expresses to the maximum degree the significance of vritti in the present context, but the word modifications is also used generally and understood more easily, and may therefore pass as the best way of interpreting it, right? In trying to understand the nature of citta-vṛttis, we have to guard against a few misconceptions which are sometimes prevalent among those who have not studied the subject deeply. The first thing to note is that citta-vṛtti is not a vibration. We have seen above that citta is not material, and therefore there can be no question of any vibration in it. Vibrations can take place only in a vehicle, and these vibrations may produce a citta-vṛtti. The two are different, though related. The second point to be noted in this connotation or connection is that a citta-vṛtti is not a mental image, though it may be and is generally associated with mental images. So it may be a mental image, it's generally associated with mental images, but it's not a mental image. The fivefold classification of citta-vṛttis in section 1, Sutra 5, definitely shows this. Mental images may be of innumerable kinds, but the author has classified citta-vṛttis under 5 heads only. This shows that citta-vṛttis have a more fundamental and comprehensive character than the mere mental images with which they are associated. This is not the place to enter into a detailed discussion of the essential nature of citta-vṛttis, because the question involves the essential nature of citta. But if the student studies carefully the 6 sutras, section 1, sutras 6 through 11, dealing with the 5 kinds of vrittis, he will see that they are the fundamental states or types of modifications in which the mind can exist. And we'll get there. But right now we have no idea what he's talking about. The author has given 5 types for the modifications of the lower concrete mind, with which the ordinary man is familiar. But the number and nature of these different types are bound to be different in the higher realms of citta. So there are different realms of citta, there's different levels, right? The last word to be considered is Nirodhah. This word is derived from the word Nirodham, Niruddham, Nirodhah, which means restrained, controlled, or inhibited. All these meanings are applicable in the different stages of yoga. Restraint is involved in the initial stages, control in the more advanced stages, and inhibition or complete suppression in the last stage. The subject of Nirodhah has been dealt with in considering section 3, Sutra 9, and the student should read carefully what is written in that connection. So we'll have to remember that when we get there. If the student has understood the meaning of the 4 words in this sutra, he will see that it defines in a masterly manner the essential nature of yoga. The effectiveness of the definition lies in the fact that it covers all stages of progress through which the yogi passes, and all stages of unfoldment of consciousness, which are the result of this progress. It is equally applicable to the stage of Kriya Yoga, in which he learns the preliminary lessons, to the stages of Dharana and Dhyana, in which he brings the mind under his complete control, to the stage of Sabija Samadhi, in which he has to suppress the seeds of Samprajnata Samadhi, and to the last stage of Nirbija Samadhi, in which he inhibits all modifications of citta and passes beyond the realm of prakriti into the world of reality. The full significance of the sutra can be understood only when the subject of yoga has been studied thoroughly in all its aspects, and so it is useless to say anything further at this stage. All right, so one of the things that I love to do when I'm reading books like this is to actually jump forward to the sections that he's referring to. And I feel like I should have done that while I was reading this, and I didn't. So now I'm feeling like maybe I should change my approach to this video. Yeah. So was that completely confusing? Were you able to follow me? Have you checked out? Or are you excited to get to the next one? I know I'm excited to get to the next one because I love stuff like this. He's constantly referring forward to future sutras that we have no idea about. So let's just very quickly jump forward a little bit to one of the sutras that he referred to. So yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. So here, when we come to the word chitta, the word is derived from the chit or chitti. So here he's referring to section 4, Sutra 34, one of the 3 aspects of Paramatma called Sat-Chit Ananda in Vedanta. It is this aspect which is at the basis of the form side of the universe and through which it is created. Okay, stop. So let's jump forward to section 4, Sutra 34. So section 4 is Samadhi Pada. Oh, but the way that... Oh, okay. It does have the numbers. I was going to say the way they write the numbers is so weird that I'm not going to be able to. So 33, 34. Okay. 34 is Purushartha Sunyanam Gunanam Prati Prasava Kevalyam Svarupa Pratishta Vachiti Shaktar Iti. Okay. Kevalya is the state of enlightenment following reemergence of the gunas because of their becoming devoid of the object of the Purusha. In this state, the Purusha is established in his real nature, which is pure consciousness. Fini. Oh, so this must be the last one. All right, so we jumped all the way to the end. Aim of the Purusha devoid of the gunas, or the 3 fundamental qualities: reabsorption, recession, reemergence, liberation in real or own nature, establishment of the power of pure consciousness. We now come to the last sutra, which defines and sums up the ultimate state of enlightenment, which is called Kevalya. The meaning of the sutra may be expressed simply in the following words. Kevalya is that state of self-realization in which the Purusha gets established finally when the purpose of his long evolutionary unfoldment has been attained. In this state, the gunas have fulfilled their purpose. The gunas are, I think, the different states. We'll get to that. Having fulfilled their purpose, recede to a condition of equilibrium, and therefore the power of pure consciousness can function without any obscuration or liberation. Okay, if that made any sense to you. So let me jump forward to another one. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. I hope you're sticking with me through this. Okay. Here. Where's the next one that they... Okay, so the ultimate aim of yoga is inhibition of all modifications in nirbija samadhi, which I said is the samadhi without the seed. It will be seen that the word transformation will not adequately express the meaning of the word vritti. Besides, the word transformation has to be used for the 3 parinamas dealt with in the first part of section 3. He doesn't refer to a particular sutra here. So let's do this one. But if the student studies carefully the 6 sutras, section 1, sutras 6 through 11, dealing with the 5 kinds of vrittis. Let's take a look at the 5 kinds of vrittis. 1, 6. 6 through 11. Okay, 6. They are right knowledge, wrong knowledge, fancy sleep, and memory. 7 is right knowledge. Facts of right knowledge are based on direct cognition, inference, or testimony. 8 is wrong knowledge is a false conception of a thing whose real form does not correspond to such a mistaken conception. 9, an image conjured up by words without any substance behind it is fancy. Duh, right? 9, 10. That modification of the mind which is based on the absence of any content in it is sleep. And then 11. Memory is not allowing an object which has been experienced to escape. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we certainly have our work set out for us. And in the next video, we will be reading the third one, Tada Trashtu Svarupe Vashtanam. Then the seer is established in its own essential and fundamental nature. Okay, so it's preparing us, it's letting us know like what the result of all this is going to be basically. And I'm totally excited to go through this with you. So thank you for joining me today.